With the Gonzaga game fast approaching this weekend, Gonzaga and UConn are a tale of two programs. Simple as that. You're locked on.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available where we get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we dive into today's show, just want to take a moment to say thank you to all of you who are supporting the podcast. It's grown so much, and it's because of fans like you, my everydayers, everyone that tunes in to value this great UConn content. We really appreciate that. We're proud to say we're the only daily podcast covering the great UConn program, both the men's and women's side, and a little bit of football. So we truly are in the basketball capital of the world, and we're thrilled to bring you the coverage you deserve. So to show our gratitude, we're giving back. We're donating 10% of our revenue to Husky Ticket Project, helping send kids to games, and we couldn't be more proud of that. We're also giving them a small monthly donation to Bleeding Blue for Good, supporting NIL initiatives that make a difference. If you're enjoying the show, take a moment to subscribe, follow, leave a review wherever you listen. Thanks again for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Okay. If you're a fan of this show, you know that I've talked about the symmetry between Gonzaga and UConn in the past. In particular, when I did some evergreen shows when I was with my wife, who was giving birth to our daughter a couple months back, talking about that 1999 team. So, look, it is one of the most interesting, wouldn't call it a rivalry, histories of two teams playing basketball. It's not, this isn't a rivalry in the traditional sense. It's not Duke, Carolina, or even UConn, Tennessee on the women's side. But the shared history between these two programs kind of tells an interesting story of college basketball's evolution over the past 25 years. Because when you think about it, that 1999 team, UConn felt snake-bitten, destined to fall short of a Final Four forever, no matter how good the teams were. It just felt like every year there was always somebody that stood in our way. And every time we got close, heartbreak followed. And who stood in our way when we finally broke through? Gonzaga, a program no one had heard of, a 10 seed making their first deep run in the NCAA tournament. That day in Phoenix, March 20th, 1999, changed everything, not just for UConn, but for Gonzaga too. UConn reached its first Final Four days later, won its first national title. Gonzaga, meanwhile, launched itself into national prominence. Dan Munson left for Minnesota for what he perceived as greener pastures after the tournament. But the real story is Mark Few taking over the program abruptly, almost forced into it as an assistant for 9 years. He was the right guy for the job. And since then, he's gone 7-23-145, made 2 Final Fours, and turned Gonzaga into a basketball oasis in the Pacific Northwest. No football team, no massive TV deals. I know they just joined the Pac-12. Don't worry about it. Just pure basketball excellence. It's almost like an old Big East school dropped in the middle of Washington State. And the game that changed everything was the 1999 Elite Eight in Phoenix. UConn was the favorite, 31-2 on the season, led by Rip Hamilton, Khalid El-Amin, and Kevin Freeman. But Gonzaga, they were the Cinderella. No one had seen them coming. They'd knocked off Stanford and Florida, and Gus Johnson had immortalized them with the iconic call, "The slipper still fits." I remember that, like you can hear it in his voice and me recreating it. That game was a battle. UConn was up 3 in the final seconds, and it felt like Gonzaga had destiny on their side. They had one last possession to tie it, and for a moment, every UConn fan held their breath, thinking, not again, we're never getting to the Final Four. But UConn held on, as we know. Kevin Freeman talked about it afterwards, saying it came down to a matter of heart. Rip Hamilton dropped 21 points, and UConn escaped with a 67-62 win. And this just wasn't any win. It was a program-defining moment. It erased years of near misses and validated Jim Calhoun's vision. And for the Zags, it was their introduction to the national stage. They proved they could hang with the big boys, at least that one time. But it set the stage as it went on for Mark Few to take over and build what we see today. when we return. We're going to break down every one of those games, including the 1999 game, from now until the most previous meeting last year in Seattle, and talk about that coming up after the break. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place bets live on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You know you guys do that. I do that from time to time. You're watching a game and you go, man, I like the way this game is going. I'm going to place, the odds are a little different now. You get that all going. And if you're a new customer, you get all those bonus bets if you join FanDuel. You get started with $150 in bonus bets if you can win your first $5 bet. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. We're back on Locked On UConn. The evolution of Gonzaga, right? Mark Few's basketball empire in the Pacific Northwest. Here's what's wild. Gonzaga's rise was that day in Phoenix. Kind of like what Dan Hurley said, like a phoenix, right? Dan Munson, their coach at that time, left for Minnesota after the tournament. A move that, looking back, was kind of a mistake. I think the last time we saw Dan Munson was last year, or like heard his name, was last year in the NCAA tournament. He took a Long Beach State team to the Final Four, to the NCAA tournament as a 15 seed, but he was actually fired before the NCAA tournament, like the tournament, I forget what league they play in, but their conference tournament, they got an unlikely bid to the NCAA tournament. So he essentially coached a team that he wasn't going to coach again. And I don't know what his history is after that, but enter Mark Few. Since taking over in 1999, we talked about it. 723 and 145. Insane. Just absolutely crazy. And I know people are going to say, yeah, but they play in the West Coast Conference. Do you know how hard it is to win 30 games every year, even in a small conference? You just don't see it. And when you do, we celebrate it. And I don't think people really truly understand how hard it is to win just one Division I basketball game. Yes, when you ascend to the top 5 or 6 programs in the country, like UConn, like the Zags, like Duke, like North Carolina, Kentucky, Kansas, whoever, you name them. And you lose to let's take Kentucky last year losing to Oakland. Yes, that's a bad loss. But we shouldn't dismiss the smaller schools because we happen to be lucky to watch a team that is one of these top programs. We should always remember our roots. We were that program once. We were the plucky underdog, the team that wanted to finish 8th or 9th in the Big East to get out of that play-in game, as Jim Calhoun would talk about it. We just didn't want to finish last, get to 8 or 9, and realize his vision eventually of this kind of sleeping giant here in the Northeast. But we weren't always that. We were Gonzaga before. So, and even that, like Gonzaga's consistency, you could argue that Gonzaga's consistency of excellence playing in, albeit a lesser conference, of getting to the tournament, of getting to the Sweet 16, of at least making it to the second round is better than UConn's. No one's going to argue that UConn's program is less than Gonzaga's, but if you did like a checklist of consistently making the NCAA tournament and winning games, Gonzaga is going to be ahead of UConn just in that small portion. Have to be fair. I also don't have any ill feelings towards Gonzaga because, it's a program that we've always handled. Their fans are typically level-headed and fun, and they're not, they're okay with the ribbing that they get from UConn fans on X because it's as Dan Hurley would say, it's brutal. But there's not a ton of negativity, at least from my perspective, on the Zag side. And so for that, I tend to be more favorable and also more level-headed. The teams that I am not as level-headed about are the teams that have this delusional thought process about who they are in the college basketball landscape. The Dukes, the Kentuckys, the Indianas. Those fan bases are, for lack of a better word, not in touch with reality. I can fully understand why they think that they're still on top, and I get it. But, facts are facts. And I totally agree with them when they say, well, UConn hasn't had a storied history for 100 years. That's true. But I will take a 25-year run of excellence that's going to continue with Dan Hurley and potentially others. And the fact that we've had multiple coaches win national championships versus one run with one coach that no one really cares about anymore. So, and that's more for Indiana and a little bit for Kentucky. People still care about Coach K. But yeah, I mean, Gonzaga, what Mark Few has done at Gonzaga, and I'm going to pull this up. I can't show you guys on the screen because it's copyright and all that stuff. But if we did a Gonzaga basketball, just a quick search on them, it is not difficult to see who they are and what they've done over the last same time frame. That's why, to me, it's such an interesting kind of symmetry with these teams. Let's look at their NCAA tournament rundown. So the year after the miracle run to the Elite Eight with Dan Munson, Mark Few takes them to the Sweet 16. He takes them to another Sweet 16 in 2000. Then he has kind of a dry run where they make the final. They make the tournament in 2001, 2002, 2003, 04. They'd only make it to the second round 3 times there, 3 out of the 4 years. Then they make the Sweet 16 again in 2005, 2006. They have a little lull. They make the Sweet 16 again in 08, 09. Then they make the Elite Eight in 2014 and 15, one of his best teams. They were 35-3. I think they were the 1 seed there. Or maybe actually, yeah, I think they were. And then it goes to the 2016-17 team that lost to, I believe, Villanova, was the runner-up for the national championship. They make the Elite Eight in 2018-19. Then they lose to, actually, 16-17 was North Carolina. Then they lose to, in the 2021 season, I think they lose to in the Final Four that year. We're going to look it up right now. Baylor, that's right. They got absolutely crushed by Baylor in that game. And it was 86-70, and it wasn't even that close. So, yeah, it's wild. Didn't enter that game undefeated, did they? I don't think so. Anyway, listen, this dude can coach. Actually, they were undefeated in that game. They were 31-1, 31-0 going into that game. They got beat by Baylor in the finals. Look, he's got an 83% winning percentage. It's nuts. Made the Sweet 16 last year. Got crushed by UConn in the Elite Eight the year before. So they just haven't been able to consistently get over the hump multiple times. Sounds like UConn. But I think the difference is, and maybe this will change by going to the Pac-12 and getting more, a tougher conference. Maybe he won't win as many games, but maybe they'll actually win a national championship at some point because they're being tested during the season. And I think that's one of the reasons why they play such a tough non-conference schedule and try to challenge themselves early, because they know once they get into conference, it's kind of easy pickings unless St. Mary's has a good year, like they did, I think, in last year, where our boy Aiden Mahaney handled them a couple times. So, yeah, this Gonzaga team is an interesting one, and their history is really interesting. They've got a bunch of 5-star recruits, McDonald's All-Americans, some really cool names of teams, players that are still kind of with the team, like Dan Dickow still does their play-by-play. Remember him from that from one of their runs early. And so Adam Morrison, Jeremy Pargo, most recently Rui Hachimura. So yeah, I mean, like it's a household name now, which is pretty incredible from where they started. All right, when we return, let's break down the game history of this. I don't want to call it rivalry, of this. I will call it a mini East Coast West Coast rivalry. Okay, we're going to do that coming up after the break. Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. It's guaranteed perfection in every single bite. And right now, you can save an unforgettable gifts with 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, score an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. With 5 generations of expert experience, they're consistently delivering the world's best steak experience, and gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages featuring gourmet favorites. From legendary steaks to mouthwatering desserts, save 50% off site-wide for a limited time at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. That's 50% off omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off promo code COLLEGE. Minimum purchase may apply. Are you back on Locked On UConn? Let's get into the heart of this. We've talked about the overarching themes, the symmetry, the shared history between UConn and Gonzaga. What makes this matchup truly special? Every time these two programs meet, it just feels like something big is on the line. I mean, over the years, they've given us classics, heartbreaks, statement wins. You name it. That's what this game by game history is all about. We already talked about the night, March 20th, 1999. UConn gets to its first Final Four. Desperate to make their first Final Four, Gonzaga was the Cinderella story. Fresh off Gus Johnson's "the slipper still fits" call. Richard Hamilton was the star of that game, leading with 21 points. Kevin Freeman chipped in 13 points and 15 rebounds. But the game came down to that one possession. Up 3, UConn had to hold on against the Gonzaga team that wouldn't quit. The Huskies made the defensive stop, clinched the win with 2 free throws, and exercised the demons of years past. It's wild how much this game meant for both programs. UConn obviously went on to win their first national championship days later, defeating Duke, while Gonzaga became a household name to this day almost overnight and transformed their program. And it was the beginning of everything for this new, somewhat rivalry. And we fast forward to, or for today's purposes, we go back in time to November 24th, 2005. UConn 65, Gonzaga 63 in a Maui Invitational final, a Maui trip that went a lot better than this year's. These two teams were already building a reputation for high-stakes battles. This game came down to Denham Brown's incredible right-handed kind of push shot. Maybe it was like a hook shot over Adam Morrison with 1.1 seconds left. UConn was led by Rudy Gay and Marcus Williams, and they found a way to grind out the win against Morrison and company, who was on his way to becoming the Wooden Award winner and probably was the worst draft pick Michael Jordan ever made. He himself said after the game, Denham made a great shot, but it just kind of showed the type of respect I feel like these two teams had for each other, and that was an incredible game. I remember watching it live. Then we go to December 1st, 2007. Gonzaga gets their first win of the series, 85-82, in Hartford at the Hartford Hall of Fame showcase in Boston, of all places. The Zags finally got that first win in the series. Jeremy Pargo, as we mentioned him earlier, was the man of the hour, dropping 23 points and 5 assists. On the UConn side, AJ Price tried to will the Huskies to a victory with 23 points of his own, but his game-tying three-point attempt at the buzzer clanked off the rim. I do remember this, and I looked it up. Jim Calhoun was not happy after this one. He said, quote, "I can't see anything positive about a single UConn player." Classic Jimmy. The frustration was palpable, and you could tell this game stuck with the Huskies for a while. Next year, a Final Four year for UConn, December 20th, 2008. The only Final Four they didn't win a national championship. They got some redemption. AJ Price missed the shot in 2007, but in 2008, he got his moment. With UConn down 11 in the second half, Price hit an off-balance 3 to force overtime and finished with 24 points. The Huskies clawed their way back to an 88-83 win in what Price called a March Madness atmosphere, and that was in Seattle. So we returned the favor at home for them in a neutral site. This game was an absolute showcase of toughness of what Jim Calhoun's squad, and set the tone for a season that, again, saw UConn reach the Final Four. Probably would have won that year if it wasn't for Jerome Dyson's injury. I'm sure someone will say that, so I'm going to say it for them. And then it went back to Battle for Atlantis in 2015, November 27th, another kind of Thanksgiving-ish deal. Gonzaga 73, UConn 70, another classic neutral site game, this time in the Bahamas. Kyle Whittler, and I always forget how to say his name. It's Wiltjer. I think he played in the NBA. Domantas Sabonis definitely is in the NBA, led Gonzaga with scoring 17 and 12 off the bench. UConn mounted a furious second-half rally, erasing a 16-point deficit, but Rodney Purvis's potential game-tying three at the buzzer fell short. Gonzaga coach Mark Few praised his team's resilience, saying, on the third day of a tournament like this, it's all about showing what kind of competitor you are. And Gonzaga definitely showed that against UConn. We fast forward to the two most recent games, and that's March 25th, 2023. Some of you might remember this. This was a game that really wasn't close. UConn absolutely destroyed Gonzaga in the 2023 Elite Eight, with Jordan Hawkins leading the way with 20 points. Drew Timme's Gonzaga star, who was in his 47th year of college, just kidding, was held to just 12 points on 5 of 14 shooting. Probably had something to do with him going up against Adama Sanogo and Donovan Clingan, amongst others. Mark Few admitted UConn was just terrific tonight, and we didn't have any answers. This was an absolute signature win on UConn's path to their 5th national championship, and it left no doubt who was the better team that season. Because as it's been well chronicled, UConn rolled through that NCAA tournament, and that was just like a middle piece of that, right? It was the 4th game of the tournament. We went on to take out Miami and San Diego State in not similar fashion, but by double digits. And the most recent one is UConn 76, Gonzaga 63, December 15th, almost to the day of last year. The Continental Tire Seattle tip-off. So we played them neutral site in Seattle, and that they're returning the favor here at Madison Square Garden. It wasn't a lot as close as this score was. UConn handled Gonzaga again pretty handily. They had Donovan Clingan leading the charge. He put up 21 points and 8 rebounds in a wire-to-wire win. Huskies shot 55 or 56% from the field and held Gonzaga to just 16.7% from beyond the arc. I believe that'll be the key this game, because they do not shoot the ball well, but if they can keep them under that 33% clip that they're shooting now, it's going to be a tough road to hold for Gonzaga against us this year. But Cam Spencer and Alex Garaman chipped in with crucial contributions. The whole team was great that game. UConn once again showed why they own this matchup. This win marked UConn's 27th win in the last 28 non-conference games. Absolute dominance outside of Big East play, and that continued against Baylor and Texas this year. What makes this history so compelling has always been the stakes, whether it's Maui, the Elite Eight, or a December neutral site game in Seattle or Boston or New York. UConn and Gonzaga always seem to find themselves on these collision courses where it's like the game of the week or the game of that month. For UConn, these games are a reminder of their dominance, but for the Zags, it's just another chance to prove that they can go toe-to-toe with the best. And as we look ahead to the next chapter, which is this Saturday, really want to kind of look back at this history and show that there's always something that seems like it's on the line. In the past performances, whether it's Final Four or Elite Eights or whatever, those are obviously big ones. But the neutral site games, whether it's a Maui Invitational, and even some of these neutral site games that are just like one-offs in December, these are big quad one and opportunities to kind of make statements about how good you are out of conference. So that's what this game is about on Saturday. Stay tuned for the next couple of days, because tomorrow we're going to have we were going to do a crossover with our Locked On Zags co-host Andy Patton, but he is unavailable. So we are doing back-to-back Gonzaga previews with Connor Hope of Hoops Hope. I'm going to kind of give you his quick little bio. He is worked for the Heat Check and also for Sleepers Media. He's a United States Basketball Writers Association member and formerly of Busting Brackets. So we're going to do a show with him tomorrow that'll come out on Gonzaga and this matchup. And then the next day we're going to go with, and I don't have this gentleman's first name yet. We're going to get to that. But if you go and look up his handle, it's House of Kraus, and he is a Gonzaga Bulldogs basketball newsletter and podcast writer. He has a Substack. If you want to go check that out, we're going to do that on Friday. On Friday, so you'll have back-to-back Zags previews from folks that are really locked in on the Zags, and we'll bring that to you over the next couple of days. But until then, this has been another episode of Locked On UConn. I'm your host, Mark Zanetto, asking you to stay locked in, stay connected, make sure those toughness meters always rise. And as always, go Huskies.